Hi and welcome back to my channel. In today's video you have my April wrap up. I'm going to do my best to keep this to as short as possible because I have 35 books to talk about. Is that a normal amount to read in a month? No. Do I think I will read this much in a month again? I'm not sure. Probably not in May. Honestly, I'm not sure because I read a lot of books and I really enjoyed them. And I enjoyed reading that much. So without further ado, let's get into the stats. So as I mentioned, 35 books. I have my stats on a paper in front of me, so that's why I'm glancing down. So 35 books all told, including audiobook pages. That is 11,000 pages, roughly. Well, actually close to 12,000 because that's 11,823 pages. Average pages per day, 394. Nope, that's not normal, but I did read a lot of audiobooks. Average page count for the book was 337. That is definitely because of all of the shorter books that I read the weekend of Peace Talks. My most read genre for the first time is not fantasy. It's science fiction. Although technically, if I lumped together memoir and nonfiction, I have them separated in genre. I read 8 memoirs and 9 nonfiction. Technically, that's my most read genre. This month, might this be the only month when this happens this year? Potentially. Books with rep, 29. 29 out of the 35. That's pretty good if I do say so myself. And authors read from before, that's 13. So I read a lot of new authors. So if I break that down, that means that it's 22 that were first time authors for me. Okay, series. So series started. I'm not 100% sure. I know that this is a series started. This is also a series started. As I look around, I'm not really sure what other series that I started. I'm really not sure why my stats say I started 5 series because as I look, it's really just these 2 that are series in front of me. So I'd have to go back and look at that. I'm not looking at the detailed stats. And then it says series continued is 3. However, these 2, Scarlet and Cress, are continuing the same series, and that's 2 of the 3. And I'm not really sure what the other... Oh, I bet I counted... Oh, here's another series started. And I bet this one I'm counting as continued because this was in between Vicious and Vengeful. This was a series started as well. Okay, now that I clear that up for myself, next we have series completed, and it says that I completed 2, which is phenomenal. I literally just remember this is starting a series as well. Anyway, I know of one for sure that I finished. Give me a second to see if I can find the other series that I finished. Found it. All right, so I finished a series with A Fire Endless because this was just duology. And then my main series for the month was Lunar Chronicles, and I finished it with this one. Next, I have to acknowledge that one of my goals I have not been doing so good on keeping up with, and that is my clearing the oldest books off my TBR. I haven't done that last month, and I didn't do it the month before, and I don't have it on my May TBR. I will need to focus on that in the future. But speaking of the goals, my Buzzwordathon goal, the book for this month was Emotions, Dread Nation. Great pick. And then my 23 and 23, I read Jackson Land and I'll Be Gone in the Dark. And then as far as reading down my arcs, I don't have a graphic for that one because I updated it for my goals for May, which you will have seen in my May TBR. But for those I had, and I've since returned this book, A Woman's Life is a Human Life, but I also had an audiobook ALC, Gentrification is Inevitable and Other Lies, and then I had Comet Madness and Nearer My Freedom. So making progress, but hopefully in May I'll make even more progress. And then on my SCASL project goal, I had 4 books: Fallout, The Line of Mars, Who to FRU, and Stowaway. All right, so there are Oh, as far as star ratings go, what I did is I took out the 9 books that I did not rate. That was 1, which was a reread, Kindred, which was an adaptation, and then 8 memoirs, the 8 memoirs that I read. And so when I took those out, my average for this month comes to 4.06. Not too shabby. I had a lot of 4.5 star reads, 4 and 4.5 star reads, as you will see in just a moment when I talk about them. Okay, so now I'm going to go through each of these books, and I'm going to be very brief, as brief as I can, if I remember, in my descriptions because, as I mentioned, I have a lot of books to talk about. So first off, I'm going to briefly mention my 1 DNF and the 2 books that I finished in April, but I read throughout this semester for a class I was taking. So this is a DNF. What's the furthest place from here? It'll be getting donated. And then the 2 education related books that I read that I finished, I didn't count them in my overall stats really, is Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. This is my 2nd time through this book. Excellent book. And Finding Joy in Teaching Students of Diverse Backgrounds. I mean, fine book, but to use it as a textbook, I have questions. So I did not rate either of those books, and I obviously did not rate my DNF because I did not get far enough for that. But now, next I'm going to talk about the books that I did not rate, and there were 9 of those. Well, no, 7 of those, because 2 of the ones that I didn't rate I just mentioned. Because I've decided not to stop rating memoirs and the books I read in Spanish, but I didn't finish any of those. I'm curious to see what that's going to do to my overall average once the end of the year comes, because I don't know if Storygraph or Goodreads factors in the books that I've read this year but haven't rated. That's a tangent. Okay, the first one that I read this month that was a memoir is The Longest Race. I read this as an audiobook, and I read it, most of it, with my mom, and this is a fantastic book. It reveals a lot of stuff, and I highly recommend this book. Next we have a book, I think the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, actually all of the rest of them I read during the weekend of Peace Talks. But the first 4 of those are graphic novels. So we have A First Time for Everything by Dan Santat. This is just an adorable recounting of a Europe trip that he got to take summer of after 8th grade year, and this is what convinced me to switch to the kids version of the comics subscription. Then we have one that was fascinating, but I won't be holding on to personally, and that is It's Lonely at the Center of the Earth by Zoe Thorogood. This was a fascinating look at the things that go on in her brain as she deals with chronic, debilitating depression. Then we have a book that I will talk a little bit more about in an SAASL video, and that is Who the F Are You? I loved this. I love her humor. I love the way she writes this whole setup. Fantastic. Next we have a book that is not a memoir, but I have read the book in its original novel form, and so whenever I reread something, say that's adapted for graphic novel, I don't rate those either, and that is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. Telling this story in this medium is phenomenal. It is so hard-hitting. The book itself is hard-hitting, but so is this, and it just pulls on different aspects of the story that Butler told. And then lastly, I have 3 memoirs, the first of which is Spare by Prince Harry. It is kind of ironic because I am filming this the day of the coronation, which, yeah, makes me laugh a little bit. But this, I don't come down as harshly on this as other people. They're like, oh, he's super entitled, etc., etc. Is he entitled? Yes. But did he also deal with a whole lot of stuff, and is he learning and coming through that? Yes, I really appreciated the way that he was approaching this. The next one took me by surprise with how much I really found myself drawn into this story. 2 memoirs that bookend me talking about this, they bring something else to it that might bring people into the story. This one, she's just telling her story, and what brings people into it is her amazing writing. And that is Somebody's Daughter by Ashley C. Ford. My mom has also read this upon my recommendation. Really enjoyed it. Ashley C. Ford talks about her life up until the time that she publishes this book. And it's the story of the so-called third rail, where those stories don't generally get told because, again, they don't have celebrity or a talent or riches to bring people in to make people want to know their story. But these are the stories that we need to know. And lastly, yes, there was celebrity to bring you into this story, but also this story is amazingly told. And that is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. I'm not going to talk too long about this. This was the BookTube and world darling last year. It is phenomenal, but it is so hard-hitting, and it's just so incredible, the stuff that she had to endure. Now I'm going to start my starred reads, and I'm going to go from lowest to highest, and thankfully I don't have any that are lower than a 3, which I'd say that's a good reading month. And the first of those 3-star reads, which is an average read, is I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. I was a lot more intrigued in this book when I was in my cold case phase, listening to a lot of podcasts about it, etc. Yes, prompted and started by Serial. This was interesting, somewhat, but because I knew a lot of the information, it wasn't as compelling for me. But it's a decent book, just certain things had some slight issues for me. The other 3-star read that I had is a book for the SEASL project, and that is The Line of Mars by Jennifer L. Holm. This is a library book, as you can tell by the reflectiveness of the cover. The synopsis that someone would read before they go into this makes them expect some sort of adventure story where all the adults fall sick and the kids have to save the day. That's not what this is. There's just one thing along the way, one event in this just basically daily life that involves illness. It's so much more, but also so mundane, and it just felt eh. Next, we get to the 3.5-star reads, and of those, I have 4. First off, we have Return to Sender by Julia Alvarez. This is a book that I read for that class that I mentioned earlier. I expected a lot more out of this book because I really enjoyed Antes de Ser Libres, which is the first book of hers that I read, and I read it in Spanish. I don't know whether it was because it was in Spanish or because it was a different topic, but this just felt like it broke no new ground and was very stereotypical. I did appreciate the aspect of one of the main characters who is a boy who's never really encountered the issues relating to immigration. He lives in Vermont, and some of the ways that he's looking at things and then his worldview gets challenged by the introduction of this family and the other main character. I thought that was well done. But overall, it was just kind of average, but slightly better than average. Next, we have one of my lowest rated book of the month books that I've done, but I should have known because it says right on the front what it is, and that is Doing Justice, A Prosecutor's Thoughts on Crime, Punishment, and the Rule of Law by Preet Bharara. I would have really enjoyed a lot more of a personal touch to this than Bharara gives. I was drawn in by his role in the criminal justice system, but also like his role in contrast to the previous administration, well, the president, former president. He doesn't talk about that. He talks about different aspects of the law, but his audience, it felt kind of weird because he shifted between like talking to prospective lawyers and talking to people like me who are just interested in the topic. I'm like, who do you think is your audience? So that was, it was good. It was kind of average. And I don't think I'm going to be holding on to this one, but I'm not sure yet. Next, we have another SEASL book, and I enjoyed this one a lot more than The Line of Mars, even though the half-star difference in rating doesn't necessarily convey that. It's still just a 3.5 star. And that is Stowaway by John David Anderson. This book is way more action-packed, and I think the plot is engaging. I think the author does some pretty solid characterization of the main character, but the side characters feel like caricatures. There's a lot of typical space opera sort of cliches in here. It's entirely predictable, although the audience that this is intended for may not have consumed all of the media that this book pulls from, so perhaps it wouldn't be as predictable for them. I just found it like, oh, okay, I knew exactly where that was going. This does also set up a duology, which I didn't realize. The second book is out, so I may read that to bump up my completed series stats, but do I need to read it? No. And last of the 3.5-star reads, we have Comet Madness by Richard Goodrich. This is a physical copy of an ARC that I had, and okay, yeah, I have an ARC here that I need to read, that I didn't read before it became a physical copy. This does help my NetGalley percentage, which I'm working on in the month of May. This book, the topic was fascinating. The idea, what was happening around that time, really intriguing, but the whole thing was kind of one note. Over and over and over, here's these various ridiculous things that people were doing when this comet was coming back. It was intriguing at first, but then he just kept basically hammering it over the head. Did I learn some stuff from it? Yeah. Is this one I'm intrigued to keep? No. Next we have my 4-star reads. I have 8. I'm going to talk about 2 of them together, and that is Scarlet and Cress. These were books 2 and 3 in the Lunar Chronicles. The Lunar Chronicles is definitely unlike the Graceling Realm series, one that I'm going to be keeping because I really enjoyed how Marissa Meyer retold these fairy tales in a sci-fi way. And the only thing really that I didn't like was the main relationship in Scarlet. There were just some pieces of it that just didn't gel with me, but overall I really enjoyed it, and I will talk more about some of my final thoughts when I talk about my 4.5-star reads, because that's where the series conclusion is. Next we have a book that I read right after I'll Be Gone in the Dark, and that is Unmasked: My Life in Solving Cold Cases by Paul Holes. I did not mean for this to basically be a sequel, but it did kind of turn out that way because Paul Holes worked with Michelle McNamara at a couple different points when on that particular case. This was intriguing and also really sad because of how much of his life he devoted towards this, and he could see how it was damaging his relationships, how it basically was one of the causes in the dissolution of his first marriage, and how he'd had problems in his second marriage because of it. And he acknowledges that, and then at the end is like, oh, there was this folder. As I got up, I saw this folder, and it gets sucked into another case. So I thought it was a really intriguing portrayal. Next, we have one that I enjoyed, but also proved to me that superhero comics are probably not my favorite sort of genre or style, and that is Impossible Jones. I really liked the characterization of Jones herself. I thought she made this really cool accidental superhero. I love the idea of superhero movies. In fact, later today I'm going to see Guardians 3. But the format of comic books, that style doesn't necessarily really work for me, and there were just pieces in here that felt jarring, and I'm like, wait, how are you telling this storytelling aspect of it? Perhaps I could get used to it, but it's not something that I'm going to invest in long term because there's a whole lot of other styles that I really enjoy. But this one was still good. Next we have the Tea Dragon Festival, which is absolutely adorable. I definitely need to get my hands on the Tea Dragon Society, and I think there's a third one in the series, but this is just absolutely adorable, cozy fantasy, really good deaf representation. I enjoyed this. Last of the books that I read during Peace Talks, at least from this stack, is Extraordinary by V.E. Schwab. I would not have ever picked this up at regular full price because it's so short and it costs so much, but I was able to get it on a deal at Owl Crate for half off. This I found absolutely fascinating. Timeline wise, I think it occurs between Vicious and Vengeful. And yes, Victor and Eli play a part in here, but the primary characters aren't characters in either of those books. So it was throwing me for a little bit of a loop because one of the characters is very similar to another character who works with Victor. But I really enjoyed this, and this brought in new characters in a way that Vengeful could have and it made it work better than it did in Vengeful, but I definitely enjoyed this. Next, we have another SEASL book, and this is the highest rated out of the 4 SEASL books that I read in the month of April, and that is Fallout by Steve Sheinkin. This is the only nonfiction on the list that I saw. For this to be the book that's the highest rated definitely surprised me. This is nonfiction, obviously about the Cold War. Really striking cover design. I think that's really well done. I think the way that Sheinkin went about this and surface level talked about all of the different categories was fascinating, because he kept you intrigued in these different aspects, but also tied it together. And I even learned some new information. And this is not necessarily one of the aspects of history that I want to read a lot about, and I go seeking out books in this era. But if I found this for cheap, I might actually pick it up. Second to last of the 4-star books, I'm going to insert a clip when I talked about this book because I had to get it back to the library. So next, and I do realize I'm not wearing what I'm wearing in the rest of this video, but I had to get this book back to the library. Next, we have A Woman's Life is a Human Life. And I think that this book was chock full of incredibly valuable information, a lot of which I knew nothing about. I think just for me, I read this at the wrong time, because I don't think my brain was in a state where I could take in so much information, and it might have even been the format. It might have been that I would have been able to take more in via audio. I'm not sure, but for that reason, I do want to give it another try, and that's why I was a little bit more lenient on the rating. Even with that, I think I could have rated it higher. This is a phenomenal book if you want to learn more about this topic. And lastly, we have another arc that I read a physical copy of, and that is Near My Freedom. This is found verse, where 2 other authors took Aquiano's words and made them into free verse, which told the story well. And as I mentioned in my recent reads where I talked about this, I just don't know how I feel about found verse. And next we have an equal number of 4.5-star reads. So I had a really good month, but I'm going to save an observation I have for just a moment. The first of those is finally Trusted the Emerald Sea. I had to. As soon as I got this, I had to read it. I've been waiting so long for this book. It took 3 months to get to me, and I enjoyed every second of it. It's cozy fairy tale type fantasy with tons of Cosmere references, and it's got Hoid as one of the characters, like he's telling the story, and I love the humor. A lot of people are hit and miss with Hoid's humor, and which is kind of basically Brandon Sanderson's humor, and they don't necessarily like it as much. I love it. So I'm looking forward to Secret Project 2, which I don't know when I'll get the physical copy, but I'm probably going to wait till I get the physical copy. But this is just adorable, and I loved the illustrations in this. This is, I would say, yeah, definitely you could start your Cosmere reading journey with this book. It's phenomenal. Then we have Winter, the conclusion to the Lunar Chronicles. And don't let the size fool you. It's over 800 pages. So it took a while to get through, but in the best possible way. I think that the height of the Lunar Chronicles all comes together in this book. And yes, it's retelling Snow White, and Winter is Snow White. And you've got that story there, but Marissa Meyer still weaves together all of the previous threads from the previous 3 books, and she doesn't drop any of them, and they come together really well. I really like how she told the story and how everything came together. Again, the one negative, and the one thing probably keeping this from a 5-star, not probably, this is a 4.5-star, so this was the thing that kept it from a 5-star, is just what she did with Wolf's character. I just didn't get what she did there. But overall, I really enjoyed this series, and it's always great when the conclusion is the highest rated out of all 4. Then we have 2 books that I read on the Weekend of Peace Talks, and we're going to start with a book that I knew I was going to love. And not love because it's adorable and attractive, but because of the stories that it tells. And that book is This Place 150 Years Retold. This book is a collection of First Nations authors. It centers the First Nations story. First Nations are the native people in Canada. Each of these artists, these storytellers, have a different artistic style that goes along with it. There was only one where I didn't necessarily prefer the artistic style. And then there was another one where the style went really hand in hand with the story, and it was telling about shamanism of the Inuit people. And it's kind of like, what on earth did I just read? But that makes sense, I think. So it was that kind of storytelling. But everything else, I learned so much. And the fact that this is own voices, this book is criminally underrated. People need to read this book. People need to know about this book. It is amazing. Then we have one that knowing my reading taste, why did I pick it up? I don't know. It looked adorable. So I decided, yes, I'm going to read it. And I loved it. And that is Crumbs by Dani Sterling. This was on the Goodreads list for graphic novels. This is just so sweet. It's a romance. It's a fantasy romance, but it's where they combine combine magic and tech. And I just loved this. I wanted more of their story, even though I think it's done. It's the conclusion. This was originally a webtoons like Lore Olympus and Heartstopper. This is just phenomenal and so adorable. Not my typical book, but I loved it. Now we have a book that is so highly rated because it fits exactly what you would think I would like, and that is Jackson Land. President Andrew Jackson, Cherokee Chief John Ross, and a great American land grab. I think I put this on my list because back when I was getting my master's in history, I took American Constitutional History as a class, and one of the papers that we had to write, we had to choose from a variety of so-called monumental or pivotal U.S. Supreme Court cases. And I chose the one that's at the heart of the Trail of Tears, and that is Worcester versus Georgia. Thankfully, this book even told me so much more, but I was intrigued in it. It's historically nerdy to the nth degree, but it's well told, and I loved it. Is this going to be the book for everybody? No, but it's definitely the book for me. Speaking of nerdiness and things that appeal to me, and will clearly appeal to other people, but not to everybody, that is The Song of the Cell, an exploration of medicine and the new human. I have read this author's first and very well-known book, The Emperor of All Maladies, which is a biography of cancer. But this is phenomenal. Mukherjee, I think, if you met him in person, would be such a relatable person. Someone who has an incredible intellect and knows a whole lot and is able to use it a whole lot. He is an oncologist, a cancer doctor, but he's able to write as well. But I think he'd be a very personable sort of person to get along with, to interact with. And this tells the story of the science of the cell and various aspects of it. He doesn't overburden the story with all these human interest stories and etc. But he puts them in at just the right spot and keeps you engaged with the narrative. I loved this. Second to last, we have one that I got as an advanced listening copy through Libro FM, and I read at the end of the month because I didn't want to carry any over into May, but I also wanted a book that would fit in my genre for Romathon, and that is Gentrification and Other Lies. I thought this was very well structured. It's short, it's to the point, and it sets up exactly what you're going to look at, and then has, here's what you can do about it at the end, which is not like preaching at you, but also like ties in with everything that was talked about. And then my final 4.5-star read of the month. This took me by surprise because I had a feeling of all the series that I put on my list to start this year that this one had a chance, but it also had a chance that I wouldn't end up liking it, but I loved it. And that is The Ninth Reign by Jen Williams. Jen Williams doesn't really introduce new fantasy or sci-fi techniques, but the way she uses them and which ones she uses and throws in and puts in, I have never seen before in fantasy. This is a very unique telling of incredibly complex story. I almost went out and bought the next 2 books in the series to binge. I probably still will. I don't know when I'll get to finishing this series, but it is incredibly well done. For more thoughts on any of these books, obviously, you need to check out my recent reads, which I will hopefully remember to link in the description. And then finally, we have just 2 5-star reads this month. And I find it interesting that the one straight high fantasy that I read this month is one of my 5 stars. What I have learned is I really enjoy nonfiction. I enjoy science fiction to an extent, but I love fantasy. It just kind of confirms stuff that I already knew. And so the first of those is a book that I read for one of my Aurelium classes, and that is A Fire Endless by Rebecca Ross. I'm pretty sure I also rated A River Enchanted 5 stars, but this conclusion was phenomenal. I got wrapped up into it. I enjoyed the weaving together of all of the relationships and the back and the forth and the political aspects that she put in. There have been people that didn't like this, but I loved it. And then the book that confirmed to me that Justina Ireland is an all-time favorite author, Dread Nation. I've read 3 books from her. All 3 have been 5 stars. And one of the things that confirmed it, I was a little nervous about this book for this reason, because I'd loved her other 2 that I've read. Zombies. This duology has zombies in it. I love the way that she plays with history with her books, and I loved it in here. I was just nervous about the zombie aspect because zombies are not my favorite. She did it really well in here, and I cannot wait to read the conclusion. So there you have it. There are the 35 books that I read this month. I think I might have a slight bit of a problem. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.